for joining me today. To kick us off, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Matt Gira. I am the Director of Student Programming at the Tsai Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale.
Cool. And you joined the Tsai Center as an innovation fellow originally in September 2020. What's the story behind that? Like, what got you excited to work with Yale?
Yeah, so I joined Tsai CITY in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, pretty much the peak of it. So essentially, I interned with what was this what turned into Tsai CITY, but it was called YEI, or Yale Entrepreneurial Institute. I made sure all of the lunches and food and people were to the right place. I was like the bottom of everything. But I got to intern a summer in 2015 in that summer fellowship program, and just kind of go through that and just see what it's like to be part of like a big time entrepreneurship program. Because I was going to a small little school in Holland, Michigan called Hope College, and there wasn't the same program. So got the opportunity to intern here, and then did my own startup for for years, went through Techstars, pitched to Dave and John, did the whole VC model a little bit. So got that experience, and then 2020 hit, and I was like, all right, like the seas kind of parted of like, ooh, there's all these opportunities. I kind of want to get out of Michigan, so made the decision. I lived with my parents for a month, and then this opportunity at Yale opened up as an innovation fellow. And essentially what the role was to essentially just kind of experiment with new programs. So it was and then helping with what we call our venture development programs at Tsai CITY. So it was being part of that, which was really interesting to me, because I wanted to kind of get back into this really high level and get to a bigger ecosystem was kind of something, and really expand the network, something like that for me. And just kind of get a new vibe, because there's the world's only so big in Michigan, really anywhere, but I think just kind of getting out of the state for a little while was something I wanted to do. So moved here and got to go experiment with different new programs, and that's where I got started.
Cool, awesome story. And before we start the interview, wanted to just give the audience some background information on the Tsai Center. So the way that I would describe it is it's pretty much like Yale's entrepreneurship and innovation hub. The Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation and other Yale alumni is, I think, the primary backers of the Tsai Center. And then was kind of curious, like, is there any other background information that you think is important for the audience to know about, the center?
Yeah, so we are the student-focused center at Yale. So we're completely open for entrepreneurship and innovation. Innovation being a little bit of a gray area, but you can kind of think of it in like 5 different what we call our pathways. So you can think of entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, creatives, civic innovation, and an explorer. So it's a really wide gamut of types of innovation. And we are really the student-facing, really student-focused side of it, where at Yale there's a lot of different things happening, but we're the primarily student-focused.
Cool. And then the first part of these questions will be sort of directed towards just like how you think about student programming at Yale. First question is like, what do you guys consider when designing and launching a new program?
Yeah, a lot to consider there. I guess off the top of my head. So the few things, one is like, student interest. Is there going to be student interest around this? Is this something that is going to help them really move forward and think innovatively and really learn something? I think one of the cool parts about Tsai CITY is like, we don't have like any for credit classes. We're all co-curricular. So it's completely optional for students to really participate in our programming. But at the same time, over 10% of campus or students at Yale are engaged with us in some way, whether they attend events, be part of our cohort programs, whatnot. So when we're designing programs, we're really thinking about all these different things and seeing like what's going to interest them. And sometimes we have to kind of pick our spots because there's such a wide variety. But really think about like what are maybe some of these like key gaps. So like, for example, last year we really like saw that we call it our joiners, or like those that don't have an idea but they want to join startups and be part of these ecosystems. So we really saw a big gap in terms of like how they were applying to different student employment jobs and things like that. So we're like, all right, let's design some programming around that. So that's what's happening kind of right now, is we're implementing new programming around that. So we'll kind of use some of the metrics based on in other parts of our center to kind of identify that. In terms of like actually executing on them, I think it can look a lot like we're figuring this out as we go. It's kind of changing as post pandemic and things like that. But it's really let's do a workshop. Let's see if that goes well. the workshop
Mhm.
goes well, let's do an intensive. Oh, intensive being not a class, but like a
Yeah.
4 to 6 week, kind of program, cohort based program. So, we can kind of scale it up that way.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece that I think is really cool about Tsai City is we have a really big focus on like DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that really incorporates how we think about things, not only from race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, but also just like the wide breadth at Yale, right? So we have every single school at Yale is represented. All these different majors, all these different schools. You get anywhere from like a first year freshman student in Yale College all the way to like a 5th year PhD student engaged in programming. So we get to design with all of that in mind. I think like, seeing these gaps, seeing, all the diversity, like how can we get blend all that together is a really, really cool way of doing it.
Cool. And then kind of curious, like how you guys measure success for your programs.
Yeah. So we don't like, there's no necessarily like particular metrics that we're trying to hit. I know like speaking of DNI, so DE&I is definitely something that we're measuring off of. Are we, being inclusive? Are we doing all those things? So it's a little bit of qualitative, a little bit of quantitative feedback. And I should note too, if you want to see these metrics, we actually publish them in our annual report every year, which is on the Tsai City website. And actually our 2023 just dropped like 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
So check that out if people want to deep dive on that. But so you can see like, the different, are we getting to all the schools? Are we, getting these, different pathways covered?
Yeah.
We don't have to be like, oh, these companies raise, $1 billion, whatever it might be. That's great if it happens, but it's not necessarily a success metric for us. For us, it's, did students learn how do they think more innovatively in different ways? And I think that's the general question we're trying to always answer.
Cool. I'll find the annual report afterwards and make sure I link it in the interview notes. And next question is, I'm kind of curious about like how the grants work for students. So I know there's like grant money attached to certain programs. Is that still stemming from like the original donations when you guys open the center, or like do you guys raise money every year for the grants that you guys fund with for students?
Yeah, so it's part of our center budget every year. So essentially what happens is like we just delegate that into our budget, which is from the gift that we were given from Joe and things like that. So that's just like a recurring budget for us, item for us in like the budget. So there's kind of three buckets, I would say, in terms of funding here at Tsai City. It's all grant fundings. We don't make any investments in the companies themselves. It's more just the grants. So we have our rolling funds, and we give up to anywhere from $500 to $2,000 of funding with our student exploration fund and student milestone fund and the student ecosystem fund. So you can think exploration fund is like, I have an idea, I want to go run an experiment to see if there's actually something there. Milestone fund is like, all right, like we kind of know what we do already. We've proven that a little bit, but like we need $2,000 to really get us over a hurdle. And then ecosystem fund is actually students telling us like, hey, there's a gap in this ecosystem. Here's how we want to go fill it, whether it's an event, maybe a new club, whatever it might be. And we give them $500 to actually go execute on that and fill that gap in the innovation ecosystem. So that's been pretty cool. So that's, I would say, bucket one is like our rolling funds, which happen as long as classes are in session, those funds are open. And we review things every week. The second one is like our cohort-based program, particularly mostly in our what we call our venture development program. So our Launchpad program, our accelerator program, and our summer fellowship program. So Launchpad doesn't come with funding, but if you go through accelerator, which is like our accelerator during our semesters, that is up to $2,000 of funding once you've completed it. So it becomes part of the programming, and we don't check like, hey, you should have done this. It's more just like, here, like you went through this program, we think you're advanced enough to really use this effectively. Essentially, and that's what they get with that. Yeah, so our summer fellowship is our biggest check, and so summer fellowship, so it comes with $15,000 of funding. Typically, these teams have 2 to 3 co-founders on them, so I like to think of it as like, hey, this is paying for this. This is their summer internship, kind of in some ways, to help really get their venture to go, hopefully full time, where they can raise a big round or whatever it might be, whatever success looks like for them. But it's our biggest check, and they get a little bit of like credit for money for swag, and they get all these mentorships and things like that. But like the money comes automatically just being part of that program and then engaging and being an active participant, essentially. So that would be like our cohort-based programs. And the third one is our like Startup Yale, which is our biggest pitch competition across Yale. So this year, I think last year was over $175,000 given away, and it's all grants. With last year, we had, I think, 9 prizes, if I remember right. And they range anywhere from like these healthcare to, financial inclusion to just like, hey, just are you innovating and filling a gap somewhere?
Mhm.
So it's a really cool variety of companies that come through. And those checks are $10,000 to $25,000 checks, which is like they're big chunks of change,
Yeah.
especially because they're grants. There's no strings attached to them.
Yeah, literally free money. You guys have a lot of grant money to play with. Cool. So I was looking at, I think it was either the summer fellowship or the accelerator. I was looking at like the recent batch, and it looked like there was like a variety of different types of businesses in one of those cohorts. It looked like there was like some that looked like small business, some that looked like startups, some that looked like nonprofits. I'm kind of curious, like, how do you guys like balance like the different needs of students working on different types of businesses within like the same program?
So the diversity, I think, at Tsai City is really cool, right? We get to see all the different vendors from nonprofits, creatives, all the different backgrounds, for students, where they're coming from, the expertise, all those different things. But it does create like a complexity within like programs, right? So, but I think we've really figured it out a lot. We're in I think a much better place than we were even 2 years ago, which is supporting. And I think it's kind of with mentorship, with programming, and just like also just kind of filling needs as we go. But I think in these early days, I think a lot of the ventures that are coming through Launchpad and Accelerator, a lot of the issues I think are really similar, right? So you still have to, find probably maybe an advisory board. You still have to go get customers. You still have to, build products or services. So a lot of the concepts are really similar in these like early stages. I think where we see it, like the things differentiate is when we get to like summer fellowship, things Startup Yale, stage teams that are going to win Startup Yale. Because they gotten the basics done. Now it's like, all right, we need these bigger partnerships or these more expertise in specific domains. And I think we can do that, right? We have a mentor network we can pull from, and then we also are trying to get them to connect to the different ecosystems. I think one of the cool parts about being in New Haven is that we're 90 minutes away from New York City and we're 90 minutes away from Boston. So we have these two major tech ecosystems and like just innovation ecosystems in general, across the board, very short distance away. So we can pull speakers in from those different things, and pull them in that way. And then, sort of fellowship, a lot of it, we'll do some basics, like here's our foundational stuff, that all the teams are maybe saying this, saying the same things. But, we can bring in specific speakers or mentors that like, hey, this is helping them this way and that way. So I think it's somewhat customized, but I think we try to cover that. Like, we try to pull at least a few things from, especially like our different cohorts. Yeah. Really build programming around that first, and then, fill in with mentorship and, trying to give connections as we go.
Cool. And I mean, you probably work with like thousands of students every year, and you really are like in the trenches with them, kind of hearing like their challenges and what problems they're facing. I'm kind of curious, like, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing students who are considering entrepreneurship as a path? Like, what challenges do they face? Is it like money is their biggest issue, or is it education, or where's like their biggest need?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, funding, I feel like is everyone's major issue all the time, but I think the thing that we're seeing over and over again is like the tech talent piece of it and really developing skills. But I think the thing that I've been really pushing for is like really be willing to have an MVP that you're embarrassed of, which I think is hard to like say like, hey, I want to launch this minimum viable product that isn't like shiny and it's not pretty. I think there's a hesitation to do that. So I think just like encouraging students to do that, I think has been a challenge. But I think there's resources to do that, especially, these different tools are coming out all the time and just developing. So that's kind of been cool to see students actually learn some of these no-code tools, and actually start building prototypes and things like that with that. And then they go and get funding and all those opportunities. I think another thing that we're seeing is like a problem. It's just like, if you don't have the connections in the industry or anything like that, you're like, maybe you're joining for the first time, right? So a lot of students, right, they're like, hey, I see this problem, but I don't know anyone in this space. Or I don't have the like these, especially like a B2B sales, right? A lot of B2B sales companies, they start with like, hey, I already knew the industry. I was maybe a former employee there, or whatever it might be. That's how they get started. Well, as a student, like you usually don't have those network connections. So I think that's something we're starting to think more about, like how can we open these doors for students more and more, so that way we can give them kind of early traction. Like I think other accelerators have some of those ways of doing that more effectively. So I think we're trying to figure out like, okay, what does that look like for us? Because I think the Yale ecosystem is quite a bit different from like these others, ecosystems that are in Boston and New York. Like, we're not MIT, we're not Harvard. We have our unique set of skills and, things like that too.
Cool. And then I was kind of curious about just like a ballpark number. So maybe for the programs where there's like a grant attached, so the summer fellowship, the accelerator, like how many of those students actually end up like working on their businesses full time after graduation versus like going the traditional path of like getting a job out of college?
So I would say it's about 50-50, I think, off the top of my head. It's not a perfect number by any chance, but I think I think it's looked different for everyone too. Some students I think will go get a job afterwards and still be working on it too, which is totally good, right? So I think it's looked different, but we've had some really cool successes come out of summer fellowship, particularly, especially the last few years. Like Atma Lab, they just won the Halt Prize, which is really cool. All over in Paris, they got confetti, and Stella McCartney was presenting their check, which is really cool. Chekhov's Gum, which just came out of our summer fellowship this past summer. They just presented it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is really cool. And then Studio Heartbreak actually just did a $400,000 Kickstarter campaign, and they're still in classes, which is really crazy. So we get to see some really cool variety and their successes while they're our students. And then, the ultimate goal is like they can be doing this venture full time afterwards, I think in some capacity, or at least it's fulfilling what they wanted to get out of it. They all come in with different goals and things like that. But I think ultimately, like if we can get them to be full time, in some capacity, or even that, again, like they're hitting the goals that they came out of, which is usually full time, they can start with that. That's kind of a goal.
Cool. And that's a good segue into sort of like the next part of our conversation. I want to sort of focus on the summer fellowship and one of your guys' programs, and really just like dive deep to help students who are considering that program to just get a better understanding of like what it is, what it feels like, what it means to go through that program. Yeah, kind of curious if you could start off by just talking about sort of like the admission process, like what steps are in the admission process, and what are you looking for during that process?
Totally. So our summer fellowship process usually, so I start designing it or go in depth, like Thanksgiving week, and then typically we kick off applications in January for it. So it coincides with our accelerator process, and so if teams have gone through our accelerator, our launchpad application process, it's the same application. It's one common application, and we use that. And it's this very similar review process, the interviews, things like that. So it's apply, get an interview, we make decisions. We also sometimes we've done some like waiting lists, not wait lists, but like hey, if you do these few things, then we'll let you in kind of deal. To kind of continue to open it up. So we've done that. But typically, we'll go through this process, and then usually by like late March, early April, we'll have the summer fellowship cohort confirmed. And then they usually start right at the very end of May. So a little bit probably before, this year's probably be a little bit before Memorial Day, to kind of get things going. But usually it's typical last few years, it's been the Tuesday after Memorial Day to get started. The way it works is it's 3 weeks full time in program. In the first 3 weeks, we are in person. We're at Tsai CITY. We go to an offsite retreat. We'll take them to the Yale Innovation Summit, which is like faculty and lots of different innovations going on for that conference. But it's a lot of workshops, a lot of programming. I like to think of it as throwing kind of the kitchen sink of resources at them. So it's a little overwhelming. That's on purpose, as I tell them. And the goal is, right, is so like first 3 weeks, it's like, here's everything, right? Here's mentorship. Here's all these people you might not have known before. Here's different strategies. Here's some goals you want to hit. All these different workshops. Here's all, you have a library of content, or maybe a hallway of knowledge and resources you can go after. And then the rest of summer is really, giving them time to go knock on those doors, open those doors, see what's all there, and really use those resources. So that way, they get to the end of summer, it's like, we have a plan, we built some really cool stuff, we did some really cool stuff, and like now we can do what we got to do. So 3 weeks in person, it's 5 weeks virtual. So they get time to, and there's really no program, it's just a weekly check-in. The goal of being that, just like giving them time to work on stuff, right? Because they don't get that same time during the academic year. So we essentially are giving them time to do that. And the last 2 weeks are to come back in person. We do a little more resources, like workshops. Maybe we missed a gap, or maybe something developed over the summer that they all have an issue with. So we'll do that. We typically do an NYU Yale pitch off and go down to New York City, bring them down for there. Last year we went to Boston as well and just did a big Boston event. So we'll get them in front of people as much as we can, especially those last 2 weeks, because at that point, right, they know what they do. They've gotten a lot of traction. They've had a lot of time to even work on things through the summer. So, we want to get them, we want to show them off, as much as possible. So that way it's kind of a nice, they get to celebrate what's happened, what they've done at Yale and things like that. But also it can be good and hopefully like a nice little launch pad as they go too.
Cool. And what advice would you give to students applying to the summer fellowship to help them sort of stand out during that admission process?
Yeah, so I would say really look at so we have a wide open, it's a completely open source, or not open source, but it's open source, but it's an open rubric. So we are pretty transparent with it. It's on our application. You can really think work through it. So whether there's 4 different pathways within, not pathways, categories within our rubric. So there's low barrier, high barrier, creative, and nonprofit. So whatever venture, whatever criteria you fit within, pick that, and then really score yourself with it. I think that's really cool that you can kind of tell it's really, for the most part, really pretty concrete of what we're looking for. It's not, so if you're just hey, if you're a high barrier, it's do you have an advisory board? Great, check, there's 2 points. All those different things. In terms of the number of points you need for summer fellowship, it's probably aim for probably 10 or 11 probably. We haven't done this rubric with the summer fellowship just yet, but that would be my kind of how to aim for 10, 13, get as many points as you possibly can. And I feel like it kind of gamifies a little bit the venture development piece, because if you can hit these points on this rubric, well, your ventures can be developing and developed as you go too, which is, so it kind of gives you a roadmap before you even, without even really knowing much too.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's a pretty objective process. It's if you hit these things, you're going to be at the top of the list. But I'm curious is all right, you have these I don't know, 30 companies that all have 12 points. How do you take them from there? How do you decide?
Yeah. So I think is that we're trying to make it more objective and really concrete, so students can know hey, here's why I didn't get in either, if that's the case. So there's that. I think we have some flexibility, right? So typically we'll plan for 12 to 15 teams, and by the time we go through the whole process, that's usually we'll have we get down to that. So I'm not too it's we'll get there. I think the cool part about Tsai CITY is we have flexibility in these different things. So if we have a lot of teams that need these resources, we'll find a way to support them, even if they're not, maybe they're too early for the program, whatever it might be. So we've done rolling mentorship. We've done our staff all does office hours. So we'll connect them to resources, even if they're not part of our program or whatnot. But based on we'll find those spots as we go. But ultimately, it's get the points, which isn't easy to do. Not all the points, getting active users, getting paying users, that's it looks easy on that criteria, but it's way harder than you might think. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds like something to figure out down the road when you guys get more demand, which will be awesome. And kind of curious about the mentors. So that sounds like a big piece of the summer fellowship. I guess how do you guys ensure that the mentors provide quality feedback to the student founders that they're working with?
Yeah, so Victor Padilla-Taylor, who's our director of networks at Tsai CITY, does a really incredible job with mentorship and really supporting students, especially matching them, getting feedback and whatnot. So he does a mentorship training, which I think is one of the cooler sessions I've seen so many times, but I think I come away with something every time, because it teaches students here's how to actually get something out of mentorship, and then here's what you should expect. And he'll train up mentors too. And there's feedback forms throughout the whole process too, because sometimes you get matched with the mentor or whatever it might be, it's not the right fit, and Victor has the really cool processes to kind of measure that and really track that, and then we can pull from, we can add more mentorship, we can always help figure out those dynamics as we go too. So I would say there's a process for that with the rolling mentorship pieces, and I think the nice thing, right, is it's the way our rolling mentorship works is it's 1 meeting a month for 3 months. So even if it's let's say it's okay, it's usually worth keep going, because you don't know, maybe the second meeting's better than the first one or whatever. So I think the processes that Victor's really brought in of coaching everyone up and here's what to actually do that, and then really measuring, okay, is this working, is it not, really helps us to dial it back. And then the other thing we do, so there's rolling mentorship, but also then there's the thematic mentorship too, where it's you might be here's someone from marketing help, and students, that's completely optional for them to sign up for, so they can sign up for that through like a Calendly link and get offered, help in that. Can grow into something, it might not. But it gives you like, here's a little bit of consistency and some more structure, but then there's also like, here's some stuff that like, hey, maybe it's filling the gaps in as we go too.
Cool. And then was kind of curious about, I guess, just like alumni from the program. So some of the companies that went through the summer fellowship, I guess, like how do you keep them engaged with the community? Like, are they back on campus? Are they involved in a Slack group? What are some ways, I guess, that you guys work with alumni?
So we're solely focused on current students. That's the way our center is built, but we still have we do keep alumni engaged. So one of the ways we've been doing that is like, we'll reach out to them, especially for like demo day, and have the alumni do the video intros for the teams, which has been cool, so that they can do a little like, here's where I've been, here's kind of the thing is, and then like kind of almost welcome the current, the teams that are pitching for fellowship and things like that into like this alumni group, which I think is kind of cool. We'll bring them in as speakers. They've come in as mentors. A lot of them have actually become like our reviewers for applications too. And essentially reviewers, all they do is just give feedback to the teams. So it's a cool way like we kind of keep them involved too. But as we're as a center, we're only 6 years old. So there's still like we're still the alumni piece is still pretty new. Where I think we're, as we get going, I think we can keep pulling from them and keep growing that as a value, not only to, to them, they can connect, with one another's alumni, but also, bring them into the program and really just, create a really robust ecosystem, even if they're not on campus and whatnot. I think we, a lot of students are going, even alumni, a lot of them go to New York, DC, Boston, we can kind of keep them in the fold in different ways, even if they're remote.
Cool. And then was kind of curious, just like, what do you see as like the biggest opportunities to improve the summer fellowship going forward?
For summer fellowship, I think they'll really improve it. I think they continue to like kind of go back to a previous point of like, how do we give them more opportunities to get more traction? So that could mean, more sales opportunities with, different partners that we might be able to pull from, more alumni mentor opportunities that could lead to more sale opportunities. I think that's something we got to continue, is like helping them get more traction faster, and really open even more doors. So at the end of the day, they still have to sell. They still have to do, be able to close those different partnerships and whatnot. But can we open more opportunities for them? I think going a little forward a little bit, I think that's something we can definitely do. And just, I think just more external audiences, especially as we come back out of the pandemic, can we give them more opportunities to meet people that could really help them move faster and maybe even grow more efficient, or, just really support them in different ways.
Cool. And that's kind of leads me to my last question. So for people that are in the startup ecosystem, interested, like have been working in entrepreneurship, what's like the best way for them to get plugged in and sort of help some of the student founders? Is it by reaching out to you? Is there some sort of contact form on the website? Yeah, how do they plug in?
I would say, yeah. So if you want to get connected to Tsai City, I would say go to our website first. Go to city.yale.edu. If you want to just connect, just be part of the community, I would like just jump into events. If you're in New Haven, great, or Connecticut in general, a lot of our events are open. So like our Friday events, a lot of our Innovators Toolkit workshops, those are open. Sometimes we do them virtually too. So even if you're not in the East Coast, feel free to jump in for those too. We try to keep things open. They're student focused, but they're definitely open to others as well, usually. So there's that. I would say if you're looking to be a mentor within the our ecosystem, Victor Padilla Taylor is your best person to contact. You can just his email should be on the Tsai City website, which is city.yale.edu. And then there's also just like our general email too, which I believe is hello.city@yale.edu. If you can email that, but in general, if you contact someone on the city staff, even if you're like, I don't know if this is the right person, typically like we're really well connected as a team, so we will find the right person, for the most part too.
Cool. Well, that was all the questions I had. Thanks, Matt, for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.